We're back. President Obama has been feeling the heat from the right, of course, for quite some time, but he may soon feel the heat from his own strongest supporters, African Americans. This is how Congressman and Black Caucus Chairman Emanuel Cleaver explained the growing anger among African Americans over the economy to McClatchy newspapers early this week. Quote, if former President Bill Clinton had been in the White House and had failed to address this problem, we probably would be marching on the White House. There is a less volatile reaction in a CBC because nobody wants to do anything that would empower the people who hate the president. Boy, is that putting it together. According to the latest Washington Post ABC poll numbers, the number of African Americans who, quote, strongly support the president has fallen by 25 points since April to a low of 58%. That's who strongly support him. However, 86% overall of African Americans still hold a very favorable view of the president. So is the president really losing the support of African Americans, or is this just hype? Michael Eric-Dyson is a Georgetown University professor and an MSNBC political analyst. And James Peterson is the director of the Africana State Studies at Lehigh University and a Huffington Post blogger. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Michael, you first. Where do you stand in trying to survey or being able to sort of get a gut sense, if you will, a gut check on the African-American community's feelings towards this president's performance?
Well, I think that African-American people divide an assessment of the president's performance versus whether or not they are inclined to still support or vote for him. The slippage was in the strongly favorable category. The overall and general favorability is still there, and 86% of African-American people say that they are somewhat favorable toward the president. Now, of course, that's linked to the decline in jobs, the crisis in unemployment, the inability of the policies of the government to be able to stimulate this economy to such a degree that African-American people can enhance their employment prospects. 16.7%, which means it's probably closer to 20% of African-American people are unemployed and not working. Of course, people vote with their pocketbooks, and their jobs may dictate their the likability of politicians. But I don't think that the Obama administration has to go into crisis mode. I think it needs to speak directly and target those African-American communities that feel the heat from this joblessness, as does the larger economy, but specifically African-American people. And if they get a wink or a nod from the White House, I think that will go a long way toward reassuring them that this president is concerned about them.
Professor Peterson, I went to a lot of rallies in Philadelphia where there are large numbers of African Americans thrilled in their hearts about this president during the campaign last time. Right. And I assume they voted to the man, to the person, to the young person. Everybody voted. And I can't imagine anybody in that community not voting, your community. And I'm asking, will you get the same kind of ebullient excitement coming back next year?
It's going to be very, very difficult to reproduce the conditions of 2008, where you have the first African-American or the first black president in the history of this country. So I think the enthusiasm drop off is a possibility, but it's kind of interesting here because, honestly, 86% or the 88%, which are the DNC numbers on this thing, that is an extraordinary number considering the economy, considering the fact that you've had a lot of black folk who've come out critically against the president, considering the fact that he's been consistently under attack by the right and by the Tea Partiers. To be at 86% is actually something we should be celebrating about, not something we should be worried about or concerned. Obviously, black folk want this president to speak more directly to black issues. I think internally the Obama administration is kind of working on that, trying to figure that out. But the bottom line here is that 86% is a pretty strong number of any voting bloc.
Well, according to the Pew Research, black wealth is 20 times less than that of whites in the country. Those numbers are staggering, by the way. It's not about income. It's about accumulated wealth. According to the Pew Research Center, the median net wealth for black households is just about $5,700 compared with white households, where the median net wealth is just over $113,000. So you think about the value of the house you own. You think about your main assets in life, Michael, and it's still a tremendous, there's a bigger gap certainly than income right now. Income is getting much closer than wealth.
Yeah, the income is still a great disparity, but the wealth gap is stunning. It's astonishing. It's a travesty of economic justice, and it shows you that the crisis in housing really led to the greatest bleed off of black wealth in the history of this nation.
So smart.
And again, the question is, will the Obama administration respond as Americans? African American people, after all, are American citizens. So we understand the reluctance to target African Americans because of fear that the right wing will exploit any attention paid to African American people as somehow some racial gerrymandering. But I think the reality is that 16.7% unemployment and this wealth gap suggests that there are targeted programs that can be done in the name of democratic procedures to help American citizens. And when that is done, I think if we find new and creative ways to address this didn't begin under Obama. The wealth gap has been going on for, a darn century and a half. The reality is, though, we've got to close that gap and begin to figure out policies that can speak to the crisis of these American citizens.
Professor Peterson,
yes.
Let me ask you about white votes. Do you have a sense, as you looked at politics in America, that there are some white voters who will vote for an African American, say, once, and they will hold that person to a very rigorous standard, perhaps a much higher standard than they would a white politician, and they'll give them one shot, and then they'll dump them the next time? I look at this. I look at the Ed Brooke. I look at the senator from Illinois. I think about this as, Cameron. I wonder if this is a phenomenon you professors have looked at analytically at all, this sense of, okay, you got your shot, but let's see you do it. If it isn't really, really good, you're out of there.
Well, listen,
Professor Peterson, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we have to parse this a little bit. Remember, there's demographic interpretations here. So the older white vote is going to have a little bit of a different feeling about President Obama than the younger white vote. And yes, there are going to be those one-time folk who just said, just for the cause, just to sort of say that, look, we're not racist. America is changing. They'll make that vote. And yes, there are going to be some voters who will also hold Obama to a different standard. That's just the ways in which race and politics operate. But I really have a lot of faith in young folk across the mainstream and college campuses. They were inspired by President Obama, and I really feel like the ways in which we think about race, and especially the ways in which older generational folk think about race, younger generational folk are really trying to move beyond that and move past that. We're not post-race, but there certainly is an earnest attempt by younger folk to look at folks outside of the sort of rigid racial lines that we've drawn for ourselves in the history of this country.
Michael, last thought, just briefly, how do you react to that?
Well, I think he's absolutely right. The reality is that I teach at Georgetown University. Many young students of all races and colors are still inspired by President Obama. Sometimes, of course, there's a downturn in the enthusiasm, so the enthusiasm gap has grown, but that's because people who are not used to politics don't understand. You got ebbs and tides of flows up and down, but I think that they'll hang on and perhaps support him very strongly.
Great universities represented tonight, Lehigh and Georgetown. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being there and being here. Thank you, Michael Dyson and James Peterson.
Thank you.